Okay, Discovery. We're going to go from paragraph 20 to paragraph 44. So in paragraph 20, young Goodman Brown says, "Can this be so?" cried young Goodman Brown with a stare of amazement at his disturbed companion. "Howbeit I have nothing to do with the governor and council. They have their ways, and there are no rule for the husbandman like me. But where I go on with thee, how should I meet that good old man, our minister at Salem Village? His voice would make me tremble both Sunday and lecture day." So again, at this point, young Goodman Brown has been sort of disillusioned, right, about his own family. He's been, disillusioned about, the people, the kings and queens in courts, the people who are in government, and the fact that they're not, the greatest of people. And pretty much every single time young Goodman Brown brings up someone who is supposed to be like pure and all these other things, the devil is like, "Oh well, nah, actually, I've been there. Like I see what they do. They're not that pure, right?" And again, all of this being the fact of young Goodman Brown as an archetype and his struggle as an archetype, and then looking at the devil, as a trope as well as an archetype, right? So young Goodman Brown is, as a trope, a character who is going through an internal conflict, right? And that internal conflict, much like Macbeth's internal conflict, is two qualities of himself that are battling. One is staying faithful to his wife and doing the good thing. The other is going out and cheating, right? And doing the ungood thing, right? And then the devil in of itself as an archetype, because the devil does not exist in real life. The devil represents, that pull towards doing those things that, for the most part we know that we should not do, right? So it's giving us that reason or that excuse. So up to this point, the devil's excuse, or archetypally our excuse, for doing something that we know is not right, but we make reasons or justifications for doing it anyway. So this becomes part of this sort of like Goodman Brown felt justified in doing these things, right? The devil is part of these justifications, but every once in a while he, looks back towards home and he's just like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, right? So that's why this is part of that rising action, because it's that, in the story as a trope, it's that character. The rising action is the character going back and forward between the things that they should be doing and the things that they want to be doing, but they know they should not be doing, right? And the devil as an archetype represents those things that, we, those reasons why we decide to not, to go ahead and do the things that we know we're not supposed to be doing, right? And as a trope, it represents this, this character that, provides those reasons. So with Goodman Brown, he's, the next one, he's just like, "Oh, well, our minister, right? I can't meet the eye," right? So he sits there and says, I wouldn't be able to look the minister in the eye. So he's trying to give himself reasons not to do this, right? And this represents that struggle within himself. This doesn't represent the struggle with another dude, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to cause offense to anybody who actually believes in, who is religious, but we're going to go with the assumption that the devil is not something that a real life person, right? So in this particular case, we have the inner struggle of a character, the internal conflict of a character, man versus himself, who, you know, is trying to, like he's doing here with meeting the eye of the good minister, give himself excuses or external excuses in terms of like, well, these people would be, or this person would be like ashamed of me, right? Even though he wouldn't know what was going on, I would feel ashamed, right? I wouldn't be able to meet them in the eye, right? That's what happens. Like, you can't, even if someone else doesn't know what you've been doing and you feel ashamed, right? It's hard for you to archetypally meet that person in the eye. And that being his minister. But then the devil says, thus far the elder traveler again being the devil, right? So this elder traveler, why is this like this? So this elder traveler being the devil, right? The elder traveler and notice again, every single time that Hawthorne talks, makes reference to him, he calls him something different. So thus far, the elder traveler had listened to it with due gravity, but now burst into a fit of irrepressible mirth, shaking himself so violently that his snake-like staff actually seemed to wriggle in sympathy. So irrepressible mirth, like he laughed so hard, right? The devil was laughing so hard at hearing that the minister is a good man, right? He's like, oh no, the minister is not. Don't talk to me about the fact that the minister is a good man. Obviously, he is not a good man, right? Shaking himself so violently. So matter of fact, he laughed so hard, it was a violent laugh, right? So he couldn't hardly. So that's what Hawthorne is doing, is showing rather than telling, right? He's just like, wow, okay, if somebody laughs that hard at the idea of this guy being pure, then how dirty does this guy have to be, when it's not Sabbath day or lecture day, right? When it's not Sunday. So he says, ha ha ha, prithee, P, then composing himself, well, go on, Goodman Brown, but don't kill me with laughing, right? So he's saying right there, yo, this guy, yeah, you think he's, but, and archetypally, right? Is talking about the fact that, these people that you think are all that good is because that's the face that they're showing you. And then again, why is he doing that? Because of the fact that he wants to showcase to Goodman Brown that, if everybody else is doing it, like he's basically giving the 5th grade to, high school excuse for doing the wrong thing, even though you're not supposed to be doing it, right? What's that 5th grade excuse? Well, everybody else is doing it, right? And that's basically what the devil is saying here, right? Well, Goodman Brown is like, oh no, nobody else that I know is doing it, and the devil's like, he's laughing, he's making it, he's like, oh, how naive you are. Everybody else is doing it. So what? Archetypally, you might as well too, right? But archetypally, is that an actual excuse, right? And this is one of the things that Goodman Brown is struggling with in this story. So, well then, to end the matter at once, there is my wife Faith, and it would break her dear heart, and I'd rather break my own. Now, this is very important, and it's also why his wife's name is also extremely important in this story, right? very important, and is why his wife's name is extremely important, because she becomes that most important aspect of why he feels like he needs to keep going back. Everybody else might be doing the dirty, but Faith, no. Matter of fact, that's why her name is like that, right? But then you go on to you go on to 24, and it says, "Nay, if that be the case, then go thy ways, Goodman Brown, for not." He's like, and he leaves it. Notice that the devil leaves it alone for a second. He's like, and hobbling off before that Faith could come to any harm. Right? So I would not for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us that Faith would come to any harm. So he's just like, you know what? I'm going to leave that. And we're going to come back to this. Why did he just because every other person that he has mentioned, every other person that Goodman Brown has mentioned, the devil has smacked down all his illusions about this person, or delusions about these people. Faith, he leaves that alone. All right? We're going to come back to that later on. Then he says, I'm going to bounce. Then he runs into Goody Cloyce. I'm going to leave the rest of this for you to go through in more detail. But the next person is Goody Cloyce. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to help you understand that once you see that there are patterns in literature, right? And all pieces of literature have its own internal patterns. Once those patterns are set, any good author is going to adhere to those patterns. Sometimes patterns are tropes, so therefore authors adopt those tropes and they adhere to the tropes, like the trope of the devil. Sometimes authors play around with the trope, and again, that creates plot twists. It creates, avant-garde situations. But even when they do something new to a pre-established literary device or literary trend or literary character or literary event, within the text themselves, to be a good author, they have to pay attention to their own rules. So even if they create new rules for themselves with a particular text, once they create those rules within that text, they have to adhere to those rules, right? Because otherwise things don't make sense, and then you start looking at the story as a story rather than as an experience. So then you have Goody Deacon, so Deacon Goodkin and Goody Cloyce start walking by, right? And he notices that Goody Cloyce was the one who taught him how to pray, right? His catechism in youth is his prayers. So she taught him how to pray, right? So it's like, oh, okay, this is the woman that taught him how to pray, right? So they're walking along and they're talking about things, and the devil comes out and she notices him. We're going to skip down here to 28. She says, the devil. And then Goody Cloyce knows her old friend, right? So that's like one of the most explicit right there, right? So rather than just telling him, now the devil is showing him, right? Because Goodman Brown is standing off to the side. She doesn't even see him there. And she's got, she's walking along, and forsooth, and then he finds out, right, that she hangs out with witches, and she herself, casts spells, right? And this whole section right there, she herself casts spells and is a witch, right? And one of the most telling tropes about that if you're reading this correctly, right, is the fact that, right, all witches have a what? As a common trope, a broomstick, right? And she lost her broomstick. So, the devil is just like, oh, well, tell you what, and we can, you can go through all this for more detail. He's like, tell you what, here's my staff. And again, this is similar to the witches wanting Macbeth to rely on their prophecy, right? Rather than to rely on his own sense of fate and destiny and his sword, right? Because the more he's dependent upon them, right? The more you're dependent on your drug dealer, the more he's going to be able to use you. The more you're dependent on an abusive spouse, the more they're going to be able to use you, right? So same situation here. Like, the devil wants, he says to her, be dependent on me, be dependent, and the staff is his power. Be dependent on my staff, and he has power over her, which she immediately hops upon, right? So he threw it down, he threw his staff at her feet, and she used that magic to get to where she wanted to. Now, this is a very big part of this moment is a very big part of his character arc. Because he says, that woman taught me my catechism. She is the one that taught me how to pray, right? Said the young man, which is Goodman Brown. And there was a world of meaning in this simple statement, right? That's huge right there, right? There was a world of meaning in this sentence. What does the narrator mean by that? He means that, it's meaningful that the person that taught him how to be faithful and good to God is like this devil worshiping person, and he starts to see the hypocrisy in the world, right? He starts to see the two-facedness in the world. Like it's really starting to hit home with him, right? And again, all of this to give him, it's not the fact of, because I see a lot of people talking about the fact that the devil is making him do something here. The devil is not making him do anything, right? This is an internal struggle, right? What the devil is doing is giving him an excuse. So as they continue to walk onward, while the elder child, and they're sort of like making speed, right? And he plucked a branch and it turned into another walking stick. Then Goodman Brown is just like, all right, you know what? And then he gives a really good excuse for stopping. He's just like, what if that wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil when I thought she was going to heaven? Is that any reason why I should quit my faith and go after her? Boom. Right? So again, this is part of that rising action and that struggle. Right? He's still so we haven't gotten to the climax yet. So there's still the rising action because he hasn't decided one way or the other at this point. He's just like, well, that's no reason for me, and this pretty much lets you know that this is what the devil's tactic has been all along, right? Everybody else in class was doing it, so I'm gonna do it. Everybody else was failing, so I'm gonna fail. Everybody else was not paying everybody else was going to the party rather than studying. I'm not gonna go to the party rather than study, right? So he says, you better think of this by and by. Sit there for the rest of your life, if you will. Here's my staff if you decide to move again. Again, he's trying to get him, right? Trying to get him to depend on him, right? So then he moves on, right? And then you have Deacon Goodkin. And we already know when these two show up, right? shrink from the idea, we already know as soon as he thinks about somebody that's really good, right, they're going to show up. Because that's part of the pattern of this text, right? And once the text establishes a pattern, it's going to continue on with its own internal pattern. So we already know what's going to happen. Like you can see all these words, right? You already know what's going to happen there, right? These are two people he respected. These are two people that he thought was good, right? What's going to happen? He's going to find out what about them. Not so much, right? So then he says, of the two reverends, sir, and he finds out that these guys are on their way to do some deviltry, right? And as a matter of fact, and this is a bit of foreshadowing, there's a goodly young woman to be taken into communion at this devil worshiping thing later on, right? Okay. So then the last part being, well, mighty well, Deacon Goodkin replied the solemn tone, spur up, it's too late, nothing can be done, until we get to the round. Right? So the pattern at this point, again, being this sort of like back and forward between him making excuses that he can't do this because no one else is doing it, to the other side where he realizes everybody else is doing it, so should he do it himself, right? But even in the middle of all of this, right, he pretty much explicitly decides, you know what, even though that's the argument, I think I should stop and not do this because, and why does he decide that he should stop and not do this? Because of this one person. Now, if the only reason that he's not doing this is because of that one person, okay, where is this pattern going? And that's one of the biggest things, is like sort of understanding, once you understand the internal logic of a text, you can start to understand where the pattern is going. The only time that, especially because of the fact that tropes are tropes for a reason, for the most part, they're like the default setting, right? For authors. That's how they learned that stories were created, and that's what people are doing, so they tend to write in those ways. The only difference would be if there is later on a plot twist, so we seem to be going in a particular direction, but the author might be doing something a little different later on, which is why we have to keep reading. Okay, so I'm not saying that like once you recognize the pattern, okay, you can stop reading, because it might be a situation where our prediction might not necessarily be true, or the way we see it going might not necessarily be true, because they might decide to do something avant-garde or different, right? But for the most part, as we continue to read, we're pretty much just trying to justify the pattern that we're noticing as we read. All right, so I hope that was helpful, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.